Good afternoon. This is Lee McWhorter, Cybersecurity Instructor for WazU. Welcome to the first lecture or workshop on network defense. This class just began Monday. I often do the lecture workshops on Tuesday, but got a couple conflicts during this next 3 weeks, so I've moved them to Wednesday, including I have to do a WazU webinar next Tuesday during the middle of the day. This class is like all of, or the vast majority of our classes, a 10-lesson class. So in these videos, we will break things up, covering the first 3 lessons this week. We'll cover the next 4 lessons next week, and the last 3 lessons in the 3rd week. This is one of the intermediate classes in our program, in the 2nd tier, if you will, or wheel of our courseware. So congrats for making it this far. Fairly hands-on class, relying on some of the stuff we set up and got running in Network Foundations, the VirtualBox and the GNS3 software. We will primarily be using GNS3 throughout, and so as to kind of get started, since the students in this class obviously been with us a little while and know all the basics, so I won't rehash all that intro stuff I've been doing in some of my earlier classes today. In our first lesson, there is some new material. A little bit of review of some of the concepts of layered defenses and least privilege and separation of duties and things like that. Those come all the way back. It's just a review from Security Foundations, those sort of baseline foundational principles that we use and as part of how we think in cybersecurity and carry out our roles. We talk a little bit about attacks. We obviously, once again, in the beginning class talked about in the intro to Security Foundations, talked about attacks and threat actors, but we talk a little bit about some additional ones as well, things like man-in-the-middle attacks, things like various types of DNS or ARP, address resolution protocol poisoning or cache poisoning, as well as privilege escalation, which is something that we'll be seeing in this class and in later classes, where the idea being that you attempt to gain access and you're trying to ultimately gain root access or administrative privileges. And then we talk about some specific server attacks, denial of service, distributed denial of service, overflow types of attacks, whether those be integer or buffer types of overflows. And then, of course, a lot of web attacks like cross-site scripting, SQL injection. And these are all just sort of a little bit of review and a little bit more depth in these topics, because in the network defense, we're going to see and do and face some of these and learn how to both do them as well as how to ultimately defend against them. Now, within, as is common in our first lessons, a large part of the content is actually the setup of the environment that we're going to be using. And basically, one of the things that I wanted to chat about is, ideally you already have, of course, VirtualBox installed, you already have the GNS3 VM imported, and you have GNS3 running and working. That was the case in Network Foundations that you got through to get here and get past system administration to get here. So it should still be working. Nothing should have changed, but if you're having any issues, of course, reach out to me, let me know, because we want to get that running. And then what you need to do for this setup is, okay, you bring up GNS3, and I'm going to actually switch into a little bit of a screen share here because I want to cover a few things. So I've got GNS3 up here. I have back here in the background, of course, the GNS3 VM is running and setting into its usual 192.168.56.101 address that we connect to it. We can see that I have the 2 green dots over here in my server summary screen. And I'm going to cancel out of this because I don't necessarily need it right now. So my local computer called Hydra is running, and so is the GNS3 server. Yes, we know that. We saw that here, right, in the background. And so they are communicating with each other and everything is set up right. If you're having any issues, you may remember this from Network Foundations, but under the Edit Preferences menu, there are a couple tabs that kind of matter. Under the first one, the Server tab, we want to make sure that our host binding is correct. It either needs to be set to your real IP address, whatever IP address your physical machine has been given from your router, or you can switch it to 127.0.0.1, which has an advantage of it will stay the same. It's the local loopback address. But either one will work. And then the other thing you got to make sure is that you've got VirtualBox selected here under the GNS3 VM, and the GNS3 VM is set up as from the drop down. It should be automatically selected, but you can select it from the drop down if needed. And assuming those things are all working, then you should have GNS3 up and running. And when you bring it up, you get the screen just like we had a second ago, this new project screen. Now, we're not going to start in this class. Like in Network Foundations, you created some new projects. You actually created your own topologies following the instructions in that lessons and those lessons in that course. In this course, we're going to provide you, in this first lesson, we are providing you with what's called a portable project file. And so I have made that for you. I've created it. I've already got routers, switches, and vulnerable machines and servers and the clients that we can use to attack from, etc. And so what you're going to do is you're going to follow the instructions in the lesson. You're going to download that file, and then you're going to bring up GNS3, and you can just cancel out of this project screen. You're going to go to File, Import Portable Project. Now that's going to open up. Now I have one here. This is actually the starter project that I created to help folks in the Network Foundations class. And all it has is 3 of our VYOS routers, already set up with the install system done. Now you don't have to worry about that with the topology I provide for this in later classes. Once again, that's already done, and usually there's already some config done. But the idea is you'll select that portable project. I'm not going to re-import this. I already know I've done it. Yours will be net defense based topo, etc. GNS3 project, and that's what you'll be downloading. And you'll import that in, and when you do that, what's going to happen, I'm going to open it because I have it from the past, so I have a couple different versions of it somewhere in here. Here it is. Here's the Net Defense Baseline Topology. And so if I open this up, when you do the import, it'll take a while, because what's happening is that portable project file has all of the virtual machines, and it has to be imported. It has to be imported into GNS3, and it will actually be transferred into the GNS3 VM. But when you bring it up, this is what it should look like. You have this simulated network here that has been built for you. As you can see, we have a couple of routers. We got router 1 and router 2. We have 3 different switches, a DMZ switch, the demilitarized zone simulated out here by these servers. We have a LAN switch simulated by our LAN clients back here. And then we have what we call the net outside. And we have a couple outside client visitors. Now, what we're doing in this, and it's covered in the lesson, but we are simulating the entire internet inside of at least in simulation, in this topology. And so we're pretending, for purposes of this simulation, that the entire internet is made up of the 10.x.x.x address space. Now, that's really just like 192.168, 172.16. That's one of the non-routable IP addresses. So those IPs don't work on the real internet, but they can be used behind a firewall, behind network address translation to power an organization. So it's a whole range. But what I've done in this case, or what we've done in this case, is we're pretending that 10.x.x.x is the entire internet. And then we're pretending, and the machines over here on the outside here, they have all been configured with a 10.1.1 something IP address. So we're pretending that's the outside. Then we are pretending that this company, represented by this router and everything over here, this company has been given its own piece of the 10 space. They've been given 10, 10, 10x. So they have one sort of a Class C equivalent, just that last octet. So 10, 10, 10, X as the IP address, and that's the IPs that they've been given. That would be, and so they've been set up over here in the demilitarized zone. And then, just like any other company, over here in the simulated LAN, we are actually using 192.168.10.x. I use the 10 for consistency. You can use any of those, and so we've simulated having another set of the non-routable IPs, which would be common inside of your network. You would use some of these IPs. So 10.111x is out here. If you need to put something on, you want to add, like one of the assignments calls for you to add your own appliance into this mix, plug it into this router, to this switch, well, then you're going to want to give it a 10.10, 10.1.1. whatever IP. This router here in the middle, the interface here on the outside is actually 10.1.1.1. So that's the router interface on the outside. Then here, this router interface is 10.10.10.10.1. And then the machines are like 10.10.10.10, 10.10.10.11, etc. I can even show that by going into config on Metasploitable, clicking, see right there, address is 10.10.10.11. So all of these machines are considered to be out on the internet. They're accessible. You can surf to these websites. You can hit these machines through. All of this is open to begin with. That's something that you'll be fixing or changing by playing with firewall rules in later lessons. And so assuming you have VirtualBox set up right, you have GNS3 set up right, you then download and import this portable project in, then what you should be able to have this set up. Now, the instructions also talk about adding stuff over here to your menu of installed or available devices. There are a number of different ways to do that, but and you've already done, like you should have already had the Firefox client and the router and already added from previous work in network defense. And there's instructions to go in and add all of these different units, almost all of these, like all three of these. This, oops, I didn't mean to drag that off. Let me just hit escape here. This one, I meant to select all that, the LAN client here. All of these, what are called Docker images, those are ones that I made or we made for you. This one was provided by GNS3. This was provided by a different provider. Of course, this is the BYOS router we learned about in Network Foundations, two of them, one sort of acting as the external and one being a router for the internal with DHCP and stuff like that. And then this Open vSwitch is another virtual Docker appliance. Now, you don't have to add them all. Once you add the project, import it, you have all these pieces. Now, one thing about it is you may not have them over here to drag in. Like I have Firefox, and I really do have Net Defense in some of these, but maybe some of them I don't, and I'm still using the older ones that are under my name, and I don't have all of them. I have most of them here, it looks like, but you can see we have, there's one of the WiseU ones now, the WiseU Snort appliance. And so the way that you can add them all, but the easiest way I find actually is to just go here to Edit Preferences, and then you come down to Docker containers. Now, occasionally you'll have to use some of the other, but very rarely in our program, and they've already been done. Like the, if we look under the QEM VMs, we'll see that Firefox and BYOS are these QEMU VMs, but we added those. You should have already added those from the previous Network Foundations class. So here, though, we can see we can have various things, and you may not have these on your list or any of these. I've played with various things, and I've added my own versions plus some of the WiseU versions. But you come to this Docker container screen, you click New. Remember, we always run things in the GNS3 VM. That's my only choice here, but if you have a choice, you want to pick that. And then you can say, use an existing image, or we're going to use a new image. And so, for example, with the new image, one of the ones you might want to get is, say, the WiseU/snort.appliance.1. And you basically just follow the instructions in the lesson. They tell you what are called the pull paths. These are the paths, and they're all WiseU damn vulnerable web app, WiseU Net Defense, whatever. So the damn vulnerable web app, that would pull that one. And so, and I'll go ahead and go through this. We click next at that point. You can give it whatever name you want. That's just what's going to show up here on the left. I'm going to leave it the default. You can tell it how many adapters. Most of them you only need one. In the logging and monitoring class later, you'll make a new one for the Snort appliance that has 2 adapters, so we can put it in line, but you'll see that later. We don't have to worry about start command, and the default terminals are fine. Basically, we're just opening the shell terminal onto, it's using Telnet, but that's locally. We're not having to actually send any passwords over the internet. We're just doing it to the local VM. So it's okay in this case. And we don't have any additional parameters to put in. So when you click add, then it shows up on this list. And then at that point, if you, oops, I'm trying to do the wrong thing here. We could tell it okay and get out of that screen. Then when we come over here, what we're going to see is now I should have, yeah, I have this new WiseU damn vulnerable. Now, of course, I've already got damn vulnerable in here. But if we drag that in, the first time you try to drag one into a topology, if you don't already have it downloaded, it'll download all the pieces and it'll do a one-time Docker pull, and all this stuff will scroll down here in this area. And once it's done, then you'll have the ability to add those. Now, like I said, you don't have to add them all. You don't have to have every one of them. The one you do have to do is the snort appliance, because in a later lesson, you're going to have to add snort appliances to the switches so we can do some intrusion detection kind of stuff. But that's in a later lesson, like next week or so. But you want to go ahead and do the setup and get that installed in here. So you would, come in, edit preferences, go to the Docker containers, and then you can tell it you want a new one and run through the steps like I just did. Once you do that, then you'll have yourself, they'll be over here. And if you want to go through and add them all, so you have WASU DAM vulnerable, WASU net defense, WASU everything, great. Then you'll have them to build your own topologies and play with forever. But the one you have to do to get through this class is the snort appliance. Now, once you have that, this is already set up for you, you're going to be able to, of course, you can right click and just use start to start firing things up. Depending upon your machine, it may take a while. The routers particularly are kind of the slowest to boot up, and the net defense client, the others come up very quickly. Like I can tell it to start this Kali Linux machine, it'll go green. I can almost instantly go back to console, and there I am at that command line. I can do an ls, I can do a w command, so who's logged in, which is nobody. I can run ps. I can get all this information. This is a running VM as a micro VM or a mini VM. And I'm using PuTTY to connect locally into that. And we can see it's up over here as well. The routers take a little longer to run, and the net defense will sometimes take a little longer to boot up. I really don't recommend just firing everything. Some of you have 32 gig machines with lots of RAM, then fine. Just fire it all up and walk away for a few minutes, come back, and it'll all be running and you can go. On this slower machine that I'm also live streaming on, I have a tendency to bring up things one at a time. If I was going to be able to get over here and attack one of these machines from this Kali Linux, I have to have these switches on, which they come up fast. The servers come up fairly fast, but this router will take a while. If I go ahead and tell it to start, we have some bad weather. You may hear it in the background. I'm sorry if that affects the audio quality today. And if I lose power, then I really apologize for that. I've gotten through 2 lectures so far. As you can see, this one is starting to boot up. Since this is not just a Docker container like a micro VM, it's a full VM. It takes a while, especially now that I'm doing it in the middle of trying to demo. What I usually do for classes, like probably next week, I'll have a lot of this already up and running on this machine so I can just dive in to doing demos and things like that. But for this first lesson, I just wanted to kind of get you the basics and kind of review GNS3. So once these things stand up fully, then we can bring up the other devices. And if you do have a machine that doesn't have a whole lot of memory, maybe you're running on a slower machine or you got lots of stuff running in the background, then you may only want to bring up the things you need to do an exercise. You don't have to have everything running at all times to be able to do many of these exercises. Sometimes you need to have all the stuff on this side, but you don't even need to have these outside stuff. Sometimes you need the outside stuff and these servers up here, but you don't need the LAN up and running. It depends on the exercise and how you go about it and what the lesson calls for. So once you have that done, that's lesson 1. That's the quick review of that. And then the next couple lessons, lesson 2 is on network equipment defense, and lesson 3 is on network defense components. Very similar names, but a key distinction. And I'm going to go ahead for the moment and stop my screen share and just go back to chatting with you a little bit. Network equipment defense. What do we mean? Well, anything that's on the network, that whether that be a router, that be a switch, that be servers, workstations, endpoints, a smart microwave, technically we need to defend this stuff. So we can defend it with all kinds of things. We're going to cover firewalls. You've learned a little bit about that already in Network Foundations. We're going to cover it more in this class. But this lesson has some specific topics related to this topology. So for example, like router security. Routers are very important devices. They help us connect from one floor to the other, one network to the other, one office to the other, etc. And if they are compromised, then an attacker could control how you connect. They could route you a different way. They could route you to their sites, to their servers. They could try to capture your data, etc. So it's very important that we maintain security on a router. Out of the box, as you saw in Network Foundations, and as you'll see with these routers out of the box for this topology, VyOS has no security installed. So you can log into it. I mean, it does, but it doesn't, because its password is VyOS and username is VyOS. So you just log in and then you're on this server and you're at the operational mode. And then if you type configure, like we did in network defense. It doesn't ask you for a password or anything, and you're in the configuration mode. You can change the routes, you can do everything. So one of the lessons, one of the topics covered in this lesson is the ability to get into VYOS and to configure the router so that sorry, I lost my clicked the wrong place. So that you can configure the router to be more secure. You'll learn how to set up passwords. And then another thing is that most of the time, especially in larger enterprises, we don't physically want to have to go down to floor 2 or floor 8, go up to floor 8, or go across the town to another building, or go across the country to manage a router. We want to be able to remotely do that. And so we were going to generally use SSH. So we also show you in this lesson how to configure that router to allow SSH. And then you could connect in remotely, technically from one of the machines on the network, like the Net Defense. You could use SSH into the router or routers. You don't have to per se, but you're going to learn how to do it. You can just right click and choose console when you're in GNS3, but when you do that, that's sort of like you're physically sitting down at that machine. And of course, in real life, we can't always do that. If our routers are in the cloud, our servers are in the cloud, the only way we're going to manage them many times is SSH. So we show you some router security stuff. Then we talk about switch security. And there's particularly something called port security. And it's very similar. If you've ever looked in your own home router at the Wi-Fi configuration, one of the things you can do is what's called MAC address filtering. So you can set it up so that your Wi-Fi will only let somebody with a known MAC address connect to your network. It is super secure, actually. People can spoof things, but for the most part, it really is a very secure approach. But it's also a pain in the butt. Like your friend comes over and wants to jump on your Wi-Fi, you're like, oh, okay, well, bring up your networking, just go to your properties. What's your MAC address? I have to log into my through a web browser to my router, and I have to put your MAC address in there and say, yes, we'll let this person connect to the network. That's kind of a pain, but in the right situations, it may be worth it, right? Trade-off of security versus convenience. And so switches have what they call port security, where you can set up a switch. You can hear the thunder, I think, there. We're definitely raining really hard out there. Hopefully our power will last another 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So anyway, port security allows you to set up a switch so it will only connect and let a known MAC address talk to it. This is a really useful thing to do. I remember I did an engagement for a client once, and they asked me to come out and take a look at things, and tell them where their security holes were. And one of the first things I did is when I got there a little early, and was put in their meeting room. And I noticed that they just had some network jacks on the wall that were unused, but there was also this conference, like conference speakerphone on the table. And I was looking at it. It had a cable coming out. It went over here and it plugged into a network jack. So what they were using was voice over IP for that system. So all I had to do was unplug that phone, plug my laptop into that network jack, boot it up, and it came up on their network, and their router gave me an IP, their DHCP server, and I was on their network. Just that simple. And so one of the first things I showed them, I said, well, this is a problem. If anybody gets any time, if you have a temp worker in an office, you have somebody sitting here like me in this meeting room for 15 minutes before the meeting starts, and that's all they need to be able to jack into your network, plug in their laptop, and boot up and get an IP. They've scanned your whole network. Maybe they've already broken into your server. They're snooping all your traffic behind the scenes with Wireshark. That's a security violation. So what they needed to do was configure their switch so only the MAC addresses of those phones, or even the computers in the offices that were theirs, could connect. And if somebody tried to just jack in, then it wouldn't necessarily allow them to get an IP address and be able to connect to the network. There is another type of switch security. Two other features that are switch security features. One is called VLANs. We've talked about VLANs before, and once again in network foundations. In this class, now this is one thing, for this lesson, for lesson 2, there is a separate little small topology. You'll go back and download that, and just like with the main one, you'll file import portable project and bring it in, and it's a small little project that has an open vSwitch and a number of clients, Ubuntu clients. And you're going to do a VLAN exercise in that topology, and you won't be in the main Net Defense class topology. I didn't want, and I don't want, the VLAN stuff done in the switches in the full topology. We only have a couple simulated machines even in that virtual LAN. So to segment the net defense and the Firefox client on 2 different VLANs would just complicate things later. So we don't want to do it. Instead, we provide you the separate little topology. Now, you've already done a VLAN exercise. It's very similar, except in Network Foundations, you use the default switch that comes with GNS3, and you just had to double click on it and set up your VLAN with a drop-down dialog box. That's not usually the way it's done. And in this case, I wanted you to expose you to how VLANs are done with a more realistic switch like this Open vSwitch, which is configurable through its command line stuff. Now, in all these cases, you're going to be running virtual machines inside of these topologies, and you're going to be bringing up a command prompt, a console, which is going to be a PuTTY connection to that virtual server, and you're going to be issuing commands, cut and paste, and whatever the case may be. You'll be typing these commands in at the command line and running these commands. And so in lesson 2, you're going to have to configure some security on the router. That'll be in the topology, the main class topology. You're going to set up, you're not going to set up port security. We just talk about it, but you'll understand at least how it works. You'll have a separate topology to do the VLAN exercise. And then you're going to see that there is one last topic covered in this lesson, and that's what's called port mirroring. And you're going to need to do this assignment and pay attention, because it's one of the times that it says do the work in the class by exercise copy of the topology, but also do it in the baseline topology. And what it does is, what port mirroring allows you to do is take a switch and say it's a 16 port switch, and maybe you've got all kinds of things, and you can imagine like we have in the class topology, we have those 3 servers up there, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 11, 10, 10, 10, 12, the LAMP server, the Metasploitable, and the damn vulnerable. They're up in our demilitarized zone off that DMZ switch. Well, they're on ports 0, 1, and 2, or 1, 2, and 3, right? 0 offset. Computers count from 0 a lot, so they're on ports 0, 1, and 2. So they're using the first 3 ports. And what if we want to monitor all those servers? Well, we can use the port mirroring feature to basically say, okay, switch, I want you to take all the traffic that's going to 0, 1, and 2 and mirror it off to another port, like port 4, port 3, or, well, 04, 804. And that way, or 803 or 4, that way that we are able to plug something into that port, and we'll see all the traffic that was going to all of those. So if, imagine you had a 16 port server, a whole big server farm, and 15 of those ports are plugged. Well, you probably have to have at least one connected to your router, right? So one connected to your router, and then a number of other ports connected to a dozen servers in your server farm. And instead of having to put a defense device in front of every one of those servers, we can say, take all that traffic, mirror it to port 16, and then we can plug one device into port 16, and it can manage and monitor all the traffic that's going by. And we're going to do that in a later lesson. So in this lesson, you set up the port mirroring, because in a later lesson next week, we're going to add snort to that port so that the snort intrusion detection software can see all the traffic going across. Once again, remember, you just do this work in the appropriate topology, and you shoot your screenshots to show you've done it. And that's how you complete these lessons. Now, in lesson 3 is one that I know I've found that people have issues with, only because it just gets more intense. We already did some firewall rules and basic firewall in Network Foundations. And so if you are having trouble with this lesson 3 of network defense, feel free to go back to whatever that is, lesson 8, 7, 8, whatever in the Network Foundations class, and review the firewall stuff. But it's actually, while it looks overwhelming, there's all these rules, it really is not that complex if you just take a breath, step back, and take a look at it. Because what you're looking at is, we can do 3 things when we set up firewall rules. We only really covered 2 in Network Foundations. We can look at traffic that's going into our network through the firewall. We can look at traffic that's going out of our network through the firewall. And we can look at traffic from anywhere that's coming to the firewall. That's the one we didn't really cover in Network Foundations. But from a network defense point of view, it's critically important. If you don't defend your firewall by setting up rules to block traffic, then that means that attackers can attack your firewall or your router and try to get in. So we obviously want to set up rules for traffic coming from the outside in, from the inside out, and to the router itself. So there'll be 3 different sets of firewall rules for a router, basically, that have to be configured. In VYOS, firewall rules, just like all the other configurations, are basically done through the set commands. And if we make a mistake, we can change that to a delete command. And we literally can use the up arrow and the arrow keys and change the previous. If we type in a set command or cut and paste one and we mess it up, then we can use the up arrow, to go to the previous command, right? Command history, use the left arrow to go to the front and to change it from set to delete and rerun the command. Now we've just deleted that one. And then we can once again use the up arrow and make some changes on the command line and reissue it correctly. Now, the lesson takes you through, it seems like a lot, but it takes you through basically the firewall rules to configure the firewall in the DMZ to protect the DMZ, and for traffic coming into the DMZ, for traffic going out of the DMZ, and for traffic going to that router 1. So 3 sets of firewall rules. Your lesson is to recreate that. You're going to see it and talked about in the lesson. And when you get to the exercise, you're going to, first assignment's basically, okay, now it's practice what you just learned. Apply that and do it to your copy of this topology. So you'll be back in the class topology, the net defense topology. You will fire up your VYLS router 1, you will open up a console on it, you'll log into it, you'll change into the configuration mode, and you'll start issuing these set commands. I don't really recommend you type them all. That's a lot of typing. What I recommend you do is actually open up a notepad and start creating the rules there. And you can, of course, copy from the lesson to start as a builder. If there's anything you need to change, you tweak it. But you put them all in Notepad. The beauty of doing something like that, and I'll actually even show this real quick, assuming I can find my example. I always have to find where I hid stuff for myself. I think this is what I'm looking for. Give me a second. Yeah, this will work. Let me share this. So I'm only going to show you part of this, and then of course you will see it in the lesson as well. Let me go back to, share screen here one more time. This one. So this notepad, you can see it says creates a name local policy for each interface on the router 1. So we're talking about the outside local. And so we have a set firewall, we have a name, default action drop. And then we start setting rules. So rule number 1000 is going to drop everything in our blacklist. And then rule number 1010, usually it's 3 lines of code, 3 lines of config that make one firewall rule. So we're saying here that except if we have a state established, in other words, that's that packet inspection. If somebody from the outside has requested data and it's coming back, so we have a state, we have a connection between a mail server and a mail server and a mail client, or a web browser and a mail server, a web server out there, then we're going to take that back. We're going to specifically, it looks like here on rule number 1100, we're going to only allow, we're going to drop the destination port 22 from TCP, unless it's from the LAN Connect group. And you'll see that each time there's one firewall rule, the numbering is the same. So all of these lines are one rule, 1100. This numbering scheme is totally arbitrary. I recommend you don't just say 1, 2, start off with, because like what happened here, I started off with 1000, 1010, 1020, and then 1100, 1110. But see, I had to come back in and add something like this one, 11. There's a rule. And if I don't leave some room, 1010, 1020, and if I ever need to come back in and add some other rule, then how do I do that? I have to renumber everything. So it's usually kind of good to count in tens or hundreds and give yourself some room. But you're going to issue all these lines in. And what I recommend is you put it all in Notepad so you can see, because like the vast majority of this content, everything up to here, the number, that part is always the same. It's the last part, right, that changes, the number and actually whatever you're doing. And so you can make sure you don't have any mistake, like 2 E's, that would cause a problem, right? But you can see how it breaks the lining, everything up. So I build my firewall rules, even my DHCP configs and other stuff out in Notepad, save them, then I have them. Plus you can send me that. This is the stuff I did, and you can show me screenshots. But this allows you, if you mess things up, to easily redo it again. You can Actually, even I had one student that one time, they had made it all, but they had made one little error in every line. And so they had cut all it in, didn't work. We look at it and we're like, oh, well, you had name spelt with two E's. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy that to another notepad. We're going to change the word set to delete. And then we're going to copy all those in, paste them in. That deletes all the bad ones. Then we go back and fix that E in all those rows, delete, and then we cut and paste the rules in correctly. Generally, if you take your time, work your way through it, though, you won't have to do that elaborate of a thing. And that's one of the reasons I recommend, instead of just sitting down and trying to type one line at a time into it and hope you get them all right and don't misspell anything, put it all into a notepad, make sure it's all lined up. You've got it all, read it through. Okay, that's one rule, that's another rule, that's another rule. Then let me cut and paste that all into the router. So once you do the first router, you're really just recreating what the lesson showed you how to do. Then the assignment gets a little tougher because we say, okay, now that you've done it for router 1 like we showed you, now you have to do it for router 2. So what you want to do is make another copy of that file. You had all those rules that you applied to router 1, so router 1 firewall.txt. Now you save as router 2 firewall.txt, and you go in and you change things. You change things based on what you need to do given the instructions assignment. And the fact that router 2 is a little different, right? Router 2 doesn't have a 10.1.1.1 IP address because that's router 1. It doesn't have a 10.10.10.1 IP address. That's the DMZ router. But it does have an IP connection on it, 172.16 to connect the two routers together. And of course, it also has a 192.168.10.1. That's what powers the local LAN, the simulated LAN. So you're going to have to change the rules appropriately to account for the different interfaces and the different goals of what we're trying to protect. We're not worried about, on the DMZ, we have to let web, you have to let web traffic port 80 get through, or you can't use that Firefox client and still get the websites behind that firewall. But on the router 2, we don't need to open up port 80, right? We're not going to come in, we don't want somebody to come in from the outside through those routers and be able to get into our local network, right? So the real meat of, there is some additional material in lesson 3 on proxy servers. We have web proxies, we have spam filters, we have content filters, all kinds of things. These are, once again, specific devices that we can use to defend the network. So like I said, in lesson 2, it's network equipment defense. In other words, what do you do to secure your router? Assign a password. What do you do to secure your switches? Well, if it's got a login, probably assign a password too, but we can do things like VLANs and port security and port mirrorings to help us make things more secure. In the case of lesson 3, we're talking about specific defense components we can put on the network to help us be able to, defend the network. So firewalls and various kinds of proxy and packet filtering and things like that. And those are what we're, and of course, we're trying it to our topology, so we really focus on the firewall rules there. Next week, we will cover a couple conceptual lessons. Those are lesson 4 and 5 are on wireless and client and application defenses. And then we will also cover a couple really hands-on lessons, much like 2 and 3 here, where we have scanners, which is where we're going to learn about all kinds of scanners, but your new favorite friend called Nmap, if you haven't already played with it, it's going to be one you just use for the rest of your life in this field. Some of the other scanners and tools. And then in lesson 7, we will get into why we did that port mirroring when we add, and we talk about the concept of intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, and intrusion prevention systems, IDS, IPS. And then, of course, our last 3 assignments are lessons 8, 9, and 10. Very hands-on. A lot of, we're going to play with running some vulnerability scans, do some vulnerability testing, identify some vulnerabilities in our topology. In 9 and then in 10, we're going to attack and take advantage of some of those vulnerabilities, and you'll get to own your first server if you haven't done that before. So the first 3 today, it's all about setting up the system. Hopefully this will help you if you're having any issues. Import the project, go in and add some of those devices, at least the snorted device, to your side menu. You can do them all while you're in there. Then in lesson 2, you're going to play around and configure the routers, passwords, and stuff like that. You're gonna set up some port mirroring in both copies of the net defense topology. And do remember The VLAN exercise is in an entirely different topology. You don't do that inside of the one that's mainly used for this class. It's just a little exercise on VLANs. And then in lesson 3, the main work is firewalls, firewall, firewall, firewall. So remember, the lesson takes you through how to set up the firewall on router 1. Your first assignment is to reproduce that, and then to go further and do it again, adjust things to do it for the router 2. I am wrapping up just about on time, maybe a little early, but that's in this new format of 343. That's all I have to cover today. And so, you know, the routine, you're one of the Forest students in the 3-week mods available in the program. So you know how this works. We will be, I will have to let the Zoom system process this video file. And once I can download it, then I'll upload it and I'll post the links to it in the learning management system a little bit later this afternoon. Assuming everything continues to go smoothly and the wave of storms that keeps coming and going through here doesn't knock me offline for any period of time. I already had a one-on-one with a student in his class yesterday. I know we are off and running in this new mod. So if you have any issues though, reach out to me. I'll be around. I'll be working and doing my own stuff. You know how I have a class tomorrow night I take myself from CompTIA. But beyond a few hours here and there where I'm doing other involvements, I will have a lot of availability over the next few days and over the weekend. So hopefully we can get you off to a good start and get you through this mod. Remember, tonight is Wednesday, and so we have our first due date for this class. And so if you have any questions, let me know, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.